This is Greg Grimke. This is part two of a presentation on energy economics. This one it's a short presentation looking at sort of what I consider some of the misleading public relations campaigns of oil and gas companies. In particular, I'll be looking at a Chevron campaign that was originally titled Will You Join Us? So willyoujoinus.com. And the idea is we're all supposed to get together and work with Chevron to make the world a better place. However, uh, Chevron's really in the business of drilling oil and gas, refining it, and selling it. They're they're not making much money on renewable energy or education or getting everybody together to solve tomorrow's problems. They're an energy company. They have stockholders. They're trying to make profits. British Petroleum the same way, Exxon the same way. So I'm just looking at what I consider some of the misleading ideas that are in energy company public relations, but also some of the great things that they do that they don't talk about as much. Often governments claim their programs are terrific for the public, and sometimes they're not. Often they're not. Similarly, oil and gas companies, they are producing tremendous good things in terms of inexpensive quality products, but they often take little credit for that and claim that they're working for environmental goals, clean energy, better education, community service, giving back, and that sort of thing. So let's contrast what oil companies actually do compared to what their public relations talk about. After Katrina and Rita, the hurricanes that hit some years ago, a lot of gasoline refining capacity was knocked offline. The free market system basically organized to solve that. Prices went up, and consumers were unhappy with that, but they'd be more unhappy to not get gasoline at all. You had a problem that the demand for gasoline at the current price was, X, when 25% of refining capacity was knocked offline, particularly in the Mississippi, Kentucky areas around the Gulf, the gas wasn't there. So how do you handle the shortage? Prices allowed people to economize in the ways they thought best. And actually, Congress, mobilized and tried to hold hearings and pass legislation, but the problem was solved before Congress could even figure out what was going on because refining capacity companies came online again. They spent a lot of money getting their systems back up and brought in some supplies from other areas. So there's sort of a symphony going on with producers. Whenever the price goes up, that signals the producers to push harder, to work overtime, to bring new resources on stream. And when the price goes up, consumers respond by cutting back, by buying less, by economizing, by carpooling, by buying more efficient cars. Friedrich Hayek discussed this in his classic essay, The Use of Knowledge in Society. He used the example of a copper industry. Say a flood hits a copper mine in Chile and knocks out 1/4 of the world's copper ore. All of a sudden, the mine's flooded and copper ore is stopped. So what's the response? Well, the copper refiners, the people that buy the copper ore and refine it into copper, all of a sudden they find that they can't get as much copper ore as they needed. Other copper mines, hire new workers, expand, buy new machinery, try and make up for the difference. But still there's a shortage, and the price of copper ore is bid up. As those remaining mines have less to sell, the price goes up. Copper refineries pass that higher price on to the buyers of raw copper. The users of copper have to pay higher prices. They look to economize, they look to recycle. And ultimately, it comes down to millions of shoppers going into the grocery store or the department store. They find a copper pan more expensive than they expected. They put off consumption because they don't need it right then. Or they buy an aluminum pan. Or people buying jumper cables buy aluminum ones instead of copper. So producers substitute where they can for similar products. They economize. Buyers put off consumption. They look to other things. And basically, the whole crisis of the copper shortage is not even known by the consumer. They just respond to the higher prices. This mobilization happens through the price system, not through any central direction or public relations campaign or anybody trying to, if a public relations announcement went out and said, gosh, news alert, copper reduced 25%, we need everyone to conserve. What would happen? Well, people rush out and buy copper because they think there's going to be a shortage. Instead, this happens below the surface without people knowing what's going on. And the same thing happens in the oil and gas industry. The same thing happened after the hurricane. The high prices led to millions of adjustments that did the best they could with adjusting to this disaster. And that's the market process in action. And in fact, every day throughout the economy, there are minor adjustments in prices. Economies lower prices in some areas, shortages cause prices higher in other areas, and people adjust their behavior. And this coordination process is what allows so much to be done, so many improvements and so much to be done without us knowing really what's going on. Okay, so that's a little bit about that. In emergencies, people respond to shortages, they do different things, that the prices are key. And in the marine natural resources topic, as the price of energy goes up, there's more demand to drill for oil and gas out in the ocean or in lakes or in rivers. That's a natural process. So this is unreported. The news media can't quite see how these prices work. They often don't describe this or they don't believe it. But the reality is, when the price goes up, companies invest massive amounts to increase supplies. So high prices in oil mean oil companies are drilling more, expanding new technology to try and bring more oil and gas on stream. However, on the public relations side, the oil companies sort of panic and say, gosh, people are mad at us because high prices, we better respond. Let's, give more money to charity, or let's show the public we're good people. We'll hire a public relations campaign. So let's just go through the different companies and see how different companies respond to this. Here is Exxon's website, and this is from some years ago. If you look at Exxon's website, you sort of see what they do. They sell gasoline, and there's a gas station. They're pouring oil. You can see the oil there. There's oil, barrels of oil, and it looks like they're an oil company in the business of selling oil. When you look at British Petroleum's website, it's a little less clear. The website says, Discover BP, a leading energy business delivering oil, gas, and renewable energy resources for a growing world. So, and they've got a picture that it's not clear what that is. Is that, an amusement park ride, or is it an oil refinery? It's attractive, it's nice, but it's fluff, it's public relations, it's designed to look non-threatening like a piece of machinery might. And as you dig through the website, you have all sorts of oddball stuff. One, British Petroleum. Well, it was British Petroleum, now it's BP Beyond Petroleum. And they've got a flower that looks like it's, a sunflower, renewable energy. So they've launched a global campaign. There's a picture of this guy, a global campaign where they're going out and hit the streets to ask people, what would you ask an oil company? And, I'd ask how much you spend on stuff like this, right? If you look at the Exxon Mobile site, they have a discussion about the challenge of drilling energy, of trying to find it, and the various computer technologies that allow them to look in the earth and see where oil might be. It's tough to do. If you look at the BP side, a big page about environment and society and sustainable actions. Here they are in Georgia growing trees or something. Again, it's not clear if that's a core part of British Petroleum's mission or if it's public relations to make it seem like they're doing something other than what they're doing. Here is the Chevron oil website. The next big energy insight from public relations at Chevron, human energy. Sure. Here's someone blowing bubbles. Apparently that's petroleum of some kind. It says if each one of us took one small step toward conservation, the impact would be huge. Well, okay, but what small step would you take? What's worthwhile? Should we recycle everything? Every time we open a can of food, should we wash it out to recycle it? Or do we, use more water trying to wash it out than we save in getting a clean can that goes into recycling? Or should we peel the label off it, so the paper label, so the can goes here and the paper there? Or is that consuming more of our time and making the world worse off in some sense? Without prices, it's hard to know what kind of conservation brings us a better world and how much is just chewing up our time. Sheldon Richman had the line that with recycling, it's like everything's worth saving except our time, right? And I remember seeing my sister when she had three little kids, and she's carrying one kid, and another kid's pulling on her, and she's got a can of something, and she's trying to wash it out and pull the label off to put it in the recycling bins. And that's tough work for people. And if it's what needs to be done to save the world or improve the world or recycle resources, great. But what if it's wasteful? What if the recycling is not productive? What if the energy and time and effort spent in that is counterproductive compared to things that matter more in our lives and in the world? So we wonder if these big ideas from Chevron's public relations are a distraction from what really matters. I mean, are they raising the price of oil so that we spend more every time at the gas pump in return for this company, putting up billboards telling us what good people they are? It's not clear. Human energy is great. Discovery, innovation, that's a good thing. But human energy is also, riding a bicycle instead of driving a car. And that's fine unless you've got a long way to go and so on and so forth. They've got all these things that they have on their website: geopolitics, environment, supply, population, all these issues. So they're paying people. They're paying public relations companies, writers, technical writers, scholars, whoever. They didn't pay me, so I'm mad at them. Maybe that's the story. But the idea is they're claiming that people should understand all these issues and take action. Well, how are people going to take action? Why would we trust stuff from an oil company to tell us about the environment, right? Why wouldn't you go to an environmental organization or scholars in the environment, an oil company? Why would they be a trusted resource on that? But there again, this is part of the getting you to think happy, think good about the energy industry. Then it says in here, again, this is some 10 years ago. One thing is clear: the era of easy energy is over. The promotional stuff says it took us 125 years. This is from a letter from Dave, the then CEO of Chevron. It took us 125 years to use the first trillion barrels of oil. We'll use the next trillion in 30. He says we can wait for a crisis to force us to do something, or we can commit ourselves to working together, to start asking the tough questions. How do we meet our energy needs? Well, what does this mean, working together? How do I work together with Chevron? I could call them up and say, hey, I've got some ideas. Or they could call me up and ask me what I think. But really what I rely on is Chevron to find oil and refine it, drill it, refine it, transport it responsibly, and provide me lowest prices possible at the gas station. I ask Apple Computer to provide good products for me. I don't work together with Apple Computer to try to ask the tough questions about the future of computing. How is that going to happen? So to some extent, these are feel-good words, but I think I would argue they're misleading. In fact, I am arguing they're misleading. This is the letter from Dave. You can find this online. Whatever actions we take, we must not look not to just next year, but to the next 50 years. Well, okay, how do you do that? How do you look forward 50 years? In fact, that's what companies need to do. If Chevron maximized its profit next year and then didn't have any more oil because they stopped drilling, obviously that would damage them. In fact, the value of the company, of any company, the value of the stock, has to do with people's expectation of the future income stream, so that you expect companies to look ahead. But for Chevron to say that we should all look ahead to 50 years, first off, we don't know what to do in 50 years. There's no way to know we would take the right actions or how we would act together. This is, empty words, I would argue, and not only empty, but they're counterproductive. Look at Chevron itself. Chevron, a few years ago, oil was $15 a barrel. How did Chevron respond to that? And this was actually 15 years ago now. Inexpensive oil. Oil fell, of course, after the stock market implosion in 2008 as well. But how did Chevron respond to the early oil fall, which I'll have in a future slide? Well, they cut dozens of their major exploration projects. They laid off thousands of people, as did all the other big oil companies. In fact, the the two names that most of our oil companies have, Chevron, Texaco, ConocoPhillips, Exxon Mobile. The reason for that is half the companies disappeared. They cut thousands of workers. They reduced their projects, and then the oil prices went way up after that, and partly because the companies had reduced exploration, reduced research. So Chevron can't even plan 5 years ahead on its own, in its own industry. How does Dave think we as a society could plan ahead 50 years? It doesn't make sense. So this is CEO David O'Reilly, former CEO's memo. He's about running out of oil. Took us 5,000. Now he says took us 125 years to drill 1 trillion barrels. We use the next trillion in 30, but it turns out that we are going to find more oil or cleaner oil. It took us 5,000 years to figure out how to get the oil off our shoes. To figure out what this stuff was. We can expect tremendous progress in the next 20, 30 years. Here's a energy chart that looks at the price of gas per day, and you can see the price of gasoline, inflation adjusted, that is when you adjust for the declining purchasing power of the dollar. Gasoline from 1980 on the left has fallen from what was essentially $3 a barrel, again if you adjusted for inflation. It fell and fell to about the $150 a barrel, $1.50 a barrel from 1985 on to about 2000. And then it dropped essentially below $1 a barrel in 1999, and in 2002 it drops way down. So this is what happens. Is this because the oil companies were suddenly generous and wanted to give away their oil dirt cheap, and then they became greedy later? No, it's just that there was a increase in the supply of oil, partly because the price had gone so far up in the 70s and early 80s. That led to a booming increase in production. When those prices went down, it had the contrary effect of pushing a lot of people out of the industry, bankrupting operations, reducing exploration, and that led to a tightening supply. You wish the oil companies could have figured this stuff out and kept their people, on stream and prepared for the future, but they made a mistake and they paid for it. He says the era of easy oil is over. Well, easy for who? It wasn't easy. Edwin Drake in 1859 drilling for oil, it was hard to do, to get it underground, to pull it out. Easy oil ran out quickly in Pennsylvania. It had to be, engineering, development, new technologies to dig deeper. Even when John D. Rockefeller and Rockefeller Oil was prosecuted for having a monopoly in the U.S., at about that time, the Mellon Company was investing in Gulf oil, and the massive Spindletop oil find happened, and massive amounts of oil were discovered from new technologies, new abilities. Okay, that's my 2 cents complaining about oil company public relations. Thank you.